let's say I'm an operator, I'm an admin, I am down in the trenches, and I'm hearing all the things you're saying, and I'm like, well, forget it. I should just quit and go, grow hay or something because this is just completely insane. What's your advice to that person who looks at this insane landscape and everything constantly shifting and goes, well, can I just run a virtual machine? Why do I need all this other stuff?
I would say to them, you can. And that's what I tell people is that, so first of all, I am actually a late adopter now, which you might find odd, given that I'm one of the poster children for the cloud native movement. But I'm a relatively a technology late adopter. I mean, look,
Mm,
Envoy's written in C++, right? It's like I tend to be on the trailing end of technology adoption, just because typically have found that to be a better business outcome, right? It's like I tend to
yeah.
um, I tend to look for business problems that are not solved by existing things on the market, and then try to figure out the right pragmatic way to fix those issues. So to the person that you're talking about who says, well, why wouldn't I just use a virtual machine? It works fine for me. I would say just use a virtual machine if it works fine for you. Like I would use the simplest technology that will get the job done, because those technologies tend to have the least amount of dependencies. Like there was the big AWS Kinesis outage a couple of weeks ago, and again, without getting into the details of that outage, what was interesting is to see when Kinesis failed, how many other AWS services also failed, right? And some of
Hmm.
those were things like Lambda, right? And in general, things that are older and more stable will tend to have less dependencies on other systems just by their very nature. So, from a risk avoidance perspective, to talk to your sysadmin or someone who's saying, can I just use a virtual machine? If a virtual machine works for you, it's very simple and it's unlikely to fail in almost any scenario. So, you know what? Just go and use it.
Let's flip this on its head, though, Matt.
Yeah.
What if I'm used to using a virtual machine, I got really good operational processes built around that, and so therefore I don't know what I don't know, and maybe microservices, which are all the rage, maybe that's better for me. But
No.
how do I know? How do I
But
know that I shouldn't go that way? It seems like the right thing to do. Maybe so many people are blogging about it.
because to me, the way that you just phrased it is exactly the wrong way to go about any change, right? Because if to me, you only look for new solutions if you have problems with your existing solutions. This comes back to what I was saying before, right?
Mhm.
Which is the the way that you have more bugs is you write new software, right? It's like new
Yes.
software yields new bugs. So by changing your system, you're going to break something. It's just the way of the world.
Right.
So I always counsel people, it's fine to read blogs and to go to conferences and to look at talks and try to understand what maybe we would call the state of the art. But I would never counsel change for change's sake. I would only counsel change if the current situation is not working. And then the key is, let's figure out, why is it not working, and what is the simplest change that I can make that will make it work.
I want to play devil's advocate a little bit here because you said the way that you introduce more bugs into your code is by writing new code, which is absolutely true. But the other thing you get when you write new code is new services and features that, your consumers and customers
Sure.
might want or benefit from. It's that whole like if you asked if you asked a buggy maker what they wanted, they'd want a faster horse, but what they really need is a car. Like, how do you know you're not missing out on the car?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's two aspects of that. Aspect one is that typically up to now we're talking about infrastructure software, right? And
Mhm.
mostly our conversation has been around infrastructure software in service of some application, like some business logic. And I would argue that if we're so and again, this is a two-part answer. So the part one is, if I'm providing infrastructure for a business process or some actual end user need, my customer is the end user. Either I'm satisfying them or not, right? So it's like there's are they able to run the business and deliver the business features that they need, right? And And so to me, the most important thing is to look at the customer base and say, is the customer my customer, right? As an infrastructure provider, is my customer able to yield the business features and the business outcomes that they desire? If they can yield that given the existing systems, then there's no need to make any changes. So it's a bit of a constant iteration cycle to figure out if I'm satisfying my customer. Now, part two of this is, as an infrastructure provider, whether I'm an internal infrastructure provider or I'm a vendor, whether that be a, like a on-prem vendor or a public cloud, certainly there's an element here which is interesting, because there's leading the customer and there's also following the customer. And I'm a
Yep.
big believer that you have to do both, right? It's like you can't
Mhm.
be so far ahead of your customer that you're not giving them the technologies that they need to solve their present day problems. But if you only follow the customer and you don't lead them to where you want to go, you're probably never going to make the incremental improvements that will allow them to unlock more business value. So I think it's a constant back and forth. The thing is that I think that in many cases, unless one is a vendor or one is a public cloud provider doing, I would say, more foundational development, I think if we come back to the standard enterprises, I think typically um, there's less leading the customer and a bit more following the customer. And I would always encourage people to really listen to the business needs of what people need to do and make sure that that is being satisfied, versus making a statement like, well, all the cool people are doing microservices and service meshes, therefore this is ridiculous. If we don't do that, we must have a microservice architecture and a service mesh or whatever. To me, that's just not the way that we should approach technology.